The morning I drove to the credit union, I wasn't worried about anything. That's the part that still gets me, even now. I had my thermos of coffee on the seat beside me. The radio was doing that thing it does in November, where the signal fades in and out through the overpass, and I was thinking about whether I needed to stop at Canadian Tire on the way home. That was it. That was all I had in my head. I was going in to withdraw $600. My youngest daughter, Paige, was turning 30 that weekend, and I'd promised her a birthday trip to Banff. Flights, hotel, the whole thing. I was going to pay for it myself. 63 years old, retired from CN Rail after 31 years, and I could still do that for my kid. That felt good. That still felt like something. The teller's name was Sylvie. She'd helped me a few times before. Young woman, maybe late 20s, always wore her hair pulled back. She pulled up my account and I watched her face change. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't gasp, but something went quiet behind her eyes. She looked at the screen, then she looked at me, and then she said, very quietly, so the man in line behind me couldn't hear, "Mr. Ashford, I think you should come speak with our branch manager. I can have someone else cover the window." I said, "Is something wrong?" She said, "Please, just come with me. My name is Ray Ashford. I grew up in Sudbury, moved to Edmonton in my 20s for the railroad, met my wife, Connie, there, raised 3 kids in a bungalow on the south side, with a backyard that flooded every spring without fail. We were not rich people, but we were steady people." Connie used to say that steadiness was underrated. She was right about most things. Connie died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about those 7 weeks much. I'm not going to talk about them now either. What I will say is that when she died, I fell apart in ways I didn't expect, and I put myself back together in ways that probably weren't healthy. I leaned on the wrong people for the wrong reasons. I made decisions out of grief that I would never have made if I'd been thinking straight. The biggest one was this. 6 months after Connie died, I added my son-in-law to my savings account. I know how that sounds now. His name is Derek. He's married to my oldest, Lorraine. They live in Calgary, about 3 hours south. Derek is the kind of man who knows the answer to every question before you finish asking it. He has opinions about interest rates and investment strategies and which contractor you should use for your deck. After Connie died, he started calling me every few days. "Checking in," he said, making sure I was doing all right. I was not doing all right. Derek suggested that it might help to have someone else on my account. "Just for peace of mind," he said. "Just so that if something happened to me, a fall, a health scare, anything, someone could access funds to help." He said Lorraine worried about me being alone. He said it so reasonably, so practically, that I couldn't find the argument against it. And honestly, I didn't try very hard to find one. I was 60 years old and I'd just buried the person who handled everything with me for 32 years. And Derek was standing there with a solution, and I was too tired to think. So I added him as a joint account holder. Connie would have had something to say about that. She was always a little cool toward Derek. Not rude, never rude. Connie wasn't capable of rude, but careful. She'd say he reminded her of the salesman who used to come to her mother's door, too smooth, too quick with the right answer. I'd always defended him. "He's just confident," I'd tell her. "He's good to Lorraine." I thought about that a lot after Sylvie walked me to the back office. I thought about how Connie had been right about so many things, and this might have been the biggest one. The branch manager's name was Frank. Middle-aged guy, glasses, a framed photo of 2 kids on his desk. He was already pulling up my account when I sat down. He turned the monitor so I could see it. I looked at the number. I had to look at it twice. $11,240. That was what was left. 8 months ago, I'd had just over $214,000 in that account. My railroad pension contributions, the life insurance payout after Connie, the money from selling the lakefront lot in Muskoka we'd been holding on to since the 90s. $214,000. And now $11,000. Frank said, "Ashford, have you been aware of these withdrawals?" I said I didn't understand the question. He turned the monitor further. He started going through the transaction history. Withdrawals every few weeks. Some of them 2,000, some of them 8, one of them 14,000 in a single afternoon. All of them traced back to the joint account holder. All of them Derek. The last one had been 9 days ago. $3,000. 9 days ago I'd been raking leaves in my backyard, and Derek had been at a branch in Calgary taking $3,000 out of my retirement savings. I sat in that chair and I couldn't speak. I have never felt anything quite like that moment. It wasn't anger yet. Anger came later. In that moment, it was just blankness. Like the floor had dropped out from under a room I'd been standing in for years. Frank was gentle about it. He asked me again if I'd known. I said no. He asked if I'd given Derek permission for any of these withdrawals. I said no. He said he wanted to make sure I understood my options, and that the credit union could begin an internal review, and that I should consider contacting the police. I asked him if Derek had the legal right to do what he did. Frank paused. He said, as a joint account holder, he had access, but joint access doesn't mean authorization to withdraw without your knowledge. That's where it gets complicated. That word, complicated, sat in my stomach like a stone. I drove home and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The house was very quiet. November quiet, which is a specific kind of quiet in Alberta. The kind where the cold presses against the windows and everything outside looks like it's already given up on warmth for the season. I kept running through it. $214,000. 8 months. 30 or 40 separate transactions. Derek calling me every few weeks to check in. Derek asking how I was holding up. Derek showing up for Paige's birthday dinner last spring with a bottle of wine and a story about a great deal he'd gotten on flights to Vegas. Vegas. I thought about that bottle of wine for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened next because I'm not proud of it. My first phone call was not to the police. It was not to a lawyer. My first phone call was to my middle child, my son, and I told him everything. Marcus, I need to stop there. I have 3 children. Lorraine is the oldest, 40 years old, lives in Calgary with Derek. Then there's my son, and then Paige. I'm not going to use my son's name here, because what I said to him and what he did with it is a wound that hasn't fully closed yet. I told him what Frank had shown me. I told him about the withdrawals, all of them, Derek's name on every transaction, and my son said, I can still hear exactly how he said it. Dad, are you absolutely sure you didn't authorize any of this? Because Lorraine said you asked Derek to help manage things. She said you told him it was fine. I said, she said what? She said Derek told her you'd basically handed him the account, that you were struggling and you wanted him to take care of some things. I said, that is not true. He said, Dad, I believe you. But Lorraine, you know how she gets. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I asked him to please not tell Lorraine we'd spoken. He said he'd try. 3 hours later, Lorraine called me. Lorraine and I have always been close in a specific way, the way that parents and firstborn sometimes are, where there's a lot of history and a lot of love, and also underneath all of it, attention you never quite name. She's like me in some ways. Stubborn, doesn't like to be wrong, needs to be the person who understood something before everyone else. She called me, and she was already halfway into a speech. Derek had come home, she said. Derek was upset, she said. Derek had explained that yes, he'd made withdrawals from my account, but that I had asked him to manage things, that I'd been struggling, that he'd only ever been trying to help. I said, Lorraine, I never asked Derek to do anything except be on the account for emergencies. She said, Dad, he has texts from you. I said, Lorraine, I don't text. I have never texted in my life. You know that. There was a silence on the line. Then she said, well, there might be emails. I said, show me the emails. She said she'd have to talk to Derek about it. I said, Lorraine, almost all of my retirement savings is gone. $200,000. I don't know how I'm going to live. And she said, and I mean this as plainly as I can, because I need you to understand what was happening in this family. She said, Dad, Derek is really distressed right now. Can we talk about this when everyone is calmer? After we hung up, I cried. I don't cry easily. I hadn't cried since Connie's funeral. But I sat at my kitchen table and I put my head down and I cried because for a moment it felt like I was losing my daughter too. Paige called me that night. She'd heard from her brother. She drove up from Red Deer the next morning. 3.5 hours, left at 6 a.m. Showed up on my porch with a box of Timbits and a look on her face I recognized from when she was small and someone had hurt her feelings at school. That fierce, quiet look. She sat with me at the kitchen table and she went through everything. She's a paralegal, Paige, works for a firm in Red Deer that does estate and family law. She's 30 years old, and she's the child I least expected to be the one sitting across from me in a moment like this. And she was exactly the right person for it. She said, Dad, I need you to call the Edmonton Police Service today. Not tomorrow. Today. I said, I don't want to destroy Lorraine's marriage. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, Dad, Derek already destroyed your retirement. I didn't have an answer for that. She drove me to the police station herself, waited in the lobby with her coffee and her phone, the same way she used to wait outside the principal's office when she was 12 and had done nothing wrong, just keeping someone company. I filed a report. It took 2 hours. The officer I spoke with was thorough and kind, and he told me that financial abuse of an older adult by a family member was, unfortunately, something they dealt with regularly. He said that Derek's status as a joint account holder would complicate prosecution, but that the volume and pattern of the withdrawals, and the fact that I had documentation showing I'd never discussed them, built a strong case. He also suggested I contact a lawyer immediately, and that I look into whether CDI's protections or civil remedies might apply. The next 3 weeks were the hardest since Connie died. Maybe harder in some ways because grief is at least a clean feeling. What I was living through now was tangled. I was angry at Derek. I was heartbroken about Lorraine. I was ashamed of myself for having trusted so easily, and then angry at myself for being ashamed because I was a 63-year-old man who'd just lost his wife and done something that seemed reasonable at the time. Paige handled more than she should have had to. She found me a lawyer in Edmonton, a woman named, I'll just call her my lawyer, who had done this kind of case before. She reviewed the transaction history. She filed a civil claim. Derek, meanwhile, was not saying nothing. He had told Lorraine, and through Lorraine he was telling anyone in the family who would listen, that I had a memory problem, that I'd been confused since Connie died, that he was protecting my assets, not stealing them, and that the withdrawals had been for home repairs and bills I'd asked him to take care of. I do not have a memory problem. I have a CN Rail pension, a clean medical history, and 31 years of shift scheduling in my head that I could recite backwards if asked. But the thing about that accusation is that once someone says it, it floats in the room. People look at you differently, even people who love you. My son called me twice during those weeks. Both times he said he believed me. Both times he found a way to mention how hard this was for Lorraine. Then something happened that I wasn't expecting. Lorraine called me, not to defend Derek. To ask me something, she said, Dad, did you add Derek to your account before or after Mom's life insurance came in? I said I thought after. Why? She said, because Derek keeps saying he was on the account from the beginning. He keeps saying Mom asked him to be on it. I know that's not true. I know Mom never would have done that, but he keeps saying it and I can't. Her voice broke. I don't know what's real. I said, Lorraine. She said, he took money from us too, Dad. From our joint savings. I found it last week. I didn't know what to do. I want to tell you how I felt in that moment, but I'm not sure I have the right words. I was angry at Derek, I was relieved that Lorraine was starting to see clearly, and I was also just sad. Profoundly sad for my daughter, who was 50 years old, and discovering that the man she'd been married to for 22 years had been stealing from her father and from her own savings account, and that these two things were happening at the same time, in the same conversation, while she sat alone in her kitchen in Calgary. I said, Lorraine, I need you to take what you know and give it to Paige, right now. Today. She said. I know. She said, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry. What came out over the following months was more than any of us had been prepared for. My lawyer, working with the information Lorraine provided about their own joint accounts, was able to establish a clear pattern of systematic withdrawal. Derek had taken approximately $203,000 from my account over 8 months. He had taken a further $61,000 from his and Lorraine's household savings over the previous year and a half. He had told Lorraine the money was going toward business investments in a franchise opportunity he was vetting. There was no franchise. There was a secondary condominium in Vancouver that he'd purchased, quietly, privately, and a pattern of spending that involved trips Lorraine hadn't known about. The criminal investigation took over a year. Derek's lawyer argued that joint account access muddied the waters on my case. My lawyer argued and proved with the transaction records that the pattern and frequency of withdrawals, combined with my sworn statement, the bank's internal review, and Lorraine's testimony, established criminal intent. The civil case proceeded alongside the criminal one. In the end, Derek pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and breach of trust. He received a conditional sentence and was ordered to make restitution, a process that, I'll be honest with you, is slow and never feels like enough. He and Lorraine separated. The divorce was finalized last spring. I want to tell you about the credit union, because that matters to me. After everything came out, Frank, the branch manager who'd first shown me the account, reached out personally. The credit union's internal review determined that the volume and pattern of Derek's withdrawals should have triggered a flag much earlier, under their own internal protocols for large account activity. They acknowledged this. They did not replace every cent. That wasn't how it worked, but they worked with me and my lawyer on a settlement that helped bridge some of the gap. I also want to say this because people have asked me. Sylvie, the teller who called me to the back that day, is the reason I know any of this. She saw the account and she made a call that wasn't required of her. She could have processed my $600 withdrawal and let me walk out. She didn't. I went back to that branch later and I thanked her. I'm not sure she fully understood how much those 4 words, "I think you should," changed what happened next. I am 64 years old now. I have $11,000 less in retirement savings than I should have, even after the restitution and the settlement. I work part-time now, 3 days a week, helping coordinate rail maintenance schedules for a smaller regional contractor. I didn't plan to go back to work at 64, but I don't say that with bitterness anymore. Mostly. Lorraine and I talk every week. It took us a while to get there. There was a period where every conversation ended in tears, one or both of us, and we had to learn how to talk about what had happened without making each other feel like we were back in it. We're getting there. She's seeing a counselor. She's stronger than she knows. Paige came to visit last month. We drove out to the river valley on a Sunday afternoon and walked along the trails until we were tired, and then we sat on a bench and watched the water. She said, "You doing okay, Dad?" I said I was getting there. She said I wish Mom could have, and then she stopped. I said, "Me too." We sat with that for a while. The river doesn't care about any of it, which is almost comforting. It just keeps moving. What I know now that I didn't know 4 years ago is this. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways you cannot predict. It doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't mean you deserved what happened. It means you were human, and you were hurting, and someone who should have loved you took advantage of that. I also know that the person I least expected to stand up for me was the one who drove 3.5 hours at 6 in the morning with a box of Timbits and didn't ask for anything except that I let her help. Sometimes the child everyone overlooks is the one who doesn't flinch when it counts. I should have known that. Connie always did.